Hey guys, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today I'm going to be showing you how to install the Roadmaster Trailer Leaf Spring kit with the shock absorbers here on our 2022 JAYCO Eagle HT fifth wheel. So our neighbor today had a little issue with his ride quality. He was getting a whole lot of bumping and a whole lot of road shock. It was transferring up into his truck and he just didn't want to deal with that anymore, so he went with the top of the line Roadmaster Comfort Ride System. The Roadmaster Trailer Leaf Spring suspension kit here is going to give you a much smoother ride. The bolt system that we installed on here allows our slipper springs to kind of move back and forth a little bit more independently than your typical Equalizer would. And what this does is basically just separates the two axles from each other, so that if this one's getting a whole lot of vibration and road shock, or maybe you're hitting a big pothole or something like that, then it's not going to transfer over to this one as easily. So that way you have more wheel on the ground, you're going to have better braking power, and you're not going to have all of that bump or road shock kind of transferring up through your frame of your trailer onto your tow vehicle. And then also we have our nitrogen filled shock absorbers, and what these are going to do is limit your up and down motion. It's going to really eat up a lot of the road shock when you're going over bumps. That way you're not feeling it, because it does transfer up into the frame itself and then it rolls forward and kind of hits you in your fifth wheel hitch. And what that does is put a lot of strain not only on your trailer, but also on your fifth wheel hitch and then on the suspension of your truck. So this whole kit does come in separate parts as well, but they are axle capacity specific. So you will want to take a look at your axle tag on your axles, make sure that you're getting the right capacity for your trailer. As far as installation goes, this is a very, very tedious but not hard installation. You do need to make sure that you properly support your trailer, so you're going to need plenty of jacks. You're going to need something to actually lift the trailer up so that your axles can hang, and then additional jacks. And you're definitely going to want to get ones that are easily adjustable, so go with a hydraulic bottle jack. That way you can kind of move your axle up and down as you're trying to get the whole system in place. Definitely make sure that you have the right system for the axle capacity, and then also there are tandem or triple axle trailer kits, so make sure that you get the correct one. That way you can put it all in and not have to wait to make any extra changes going forward. Or also double check your U-bolt height before you even purchase it. Make sure that you get the correct size U-bolts, just because you're going to need a little bit extra threads at the top for your new bracket that's going to hold on your shock kit. So our first couple of steps for setting up our Roadmaster Comfort Ride is to lift up our trailer so that our axles can hang freely, and to take off our wheels. I've already gone ahead and lifted up our trailer. If you don't have a drill that you can really break those lug nuts off with, go ahead and break those off first, take your wheels off, and then lift it up. But we'll go ahead and we'll pop these off. So the next step is going to be removing our suspension, how it is right now. So we're going to pull off our leaf springs, our equalizers. We're going to take out the bolts on each side of our hangers, but we're going to have to hold on to those, because that's how our new leaf springs are going to attach to our hangers. And then also we want to take a look at our U-bolts. So these U-bolts are going to be a little bit too short. We are going to have to swap to new ones, because the plate that holds our shocks is going to sit on top of here, and that's going to take up probably about 1/4 inch of space, which you can see we don't have. I like to break the U-bolts first, because they're kind of the harder ones to get. So just go ahead and kind of loosen these up, and I also kind of like to do it a little bit evenly, just so it doesn't start to kind of bend one way or the other. Now before we fully pull our U-bolts out, we do want to make sure that we have our axle supported by some jack stands. I have these on the ends. You're going to want to make sure that you do it on each end and not in the center. If you do, you have a good chance of it kind of teetering and going one way and kind of falling off. And these are pretty heavy. Jiggle it around if you need to. You can take a mallet to it and just kind of give it a couple smacks, get it off of the bolts. And then we can toss these, because you don't want to really reuse any U-bolts after they've been taken off, because they start to bend once they're torqued down and kind of fit that axle how it is. And like I said, we are going to need longer ones anyway, so These are just trash. And we're just going to repeat the same process for each side of both of our axles. So next we're going to be taking out these shoulder bolts for our hangers. Make sure that you have a socket on the head of it. We don't want that to spin at all because it has teeth that bite into the hanger and prevent it from moving. So make sure that you use a breaker bar, hold that in place, and then use your socket wrench on the other side on the nut to break that off. So next I'm going to use a punch, and I'm going to hit it directly in the center of that bolt because I want to save it. If I hit it with the hammer, there's a good chance I could kind of mess up the threads on it. So I'll go ahead and pop that out. All right, now we can go ahead and repeat this same process over with our other shoulder bolt. Now we're going to go ahead and take out our Equalizer center bolt here. I'm also going to kind of support this a little bit because it isn't really attached to anything, so I'm just put my knees up there. And then we can just pull the whole assembly out. If you need to, you may have to lower your jacks just a bit. So our next step is putting our slipper spring box up here. Make sure that there's no obstructions in the way. A lot of the times you'll have the underbelly kind of bolted up to the frame itself. If you do, you're gonna have to go ahead and cut that back a little bit. What I typically do is just put the box up, mark around it, and then cut off what I need to. On a lot of newer trailers, I've been seeing this extra support on each hanger. Sometimes that gets in the way. I've talked to Roadmaster about this in the past, and they told us to kind of chip away at this if we need to, because I have had some of these supports where they just stick too far out and then they block the box from sitting fully up against the frame. Now I do have a little bit of an extra piece of weld right here. I am going to kind of just drill that down a bit. That way we sit flush, because we don't want any kind of movement between the box and the frame. Now that I've gone ahead and kind of ground down that little bit of extra welding that was kind of sitting on the top there, and this is going to sit flush, we can go ahead and take one of our larger 9/16 bolts. We're going to put a washer on it. We'll have the spacer, and that's going to go between the hanger, so that way your hanger can't move at all. And then on the opposite side of the box, we're going to have our second washer and a lock nut. Start slipping that in. Get that spacer in place. Then our washer and our lock nut. So right now I've got a floor jack holding this up. That bolt's still just hand tight. That's not actually going to hold it just yet. Our next step is going to be shooting in some holes on each side of our box. There's going to be two little holes on here that we can shoot in bracket or our mounting bolts with, and what we're going to need to do is make sure that we have the same amount on each side. Before I started tightening this up, it was kind of leaning more out this side than it is over here, so you got to kind of pull that back, and then I tighten it up with the jack just to keep it from moving back. And then I'm going to go ahead, take my paint marker, mark out my holes, and I'll drop this back down and drill it out. So you're going to want to use a 21/64 drill bit, and then we can start putting it in. Make sure you get it exactly where you need it. If you need to, you can go ahead and put a hole punch just to get that tip kind of started. And we'll just keep repeating that process. Then we go ahead and just put our slipper spring box back in place. There we go. Next we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of Loctite on our self-tapping screws. We need 4 of these. Just kind of coat that up. Now we're going to go ahead and shoot in our bolts into those holes that we made. Don't want to go too hard on it. I'm just getting it so that it'll kind of close up that gap, because we are going to have to torque these down. We can go ahead and torque these down to spec. Next, we're going to go ahead and we'll slip in our leaf spring and just let it rest on the axle. We're going to take our smaller silver bolts that have a spacer in it. We're going to put that right in this smaller hole towards the bottom, and that's what our leaf spring is going to rest on. So we can go ahead and kind of push that up. We'll get our spacer in place, and we can slip a bolt through and put on our lock nut. On the top, we're going to go ahead and use our larger bolt with this little spacer that's also going to have this flat edge on it. That flat edge needs to sit onto the leaf spring itself. That's just basically going to prevent it from being able to move out of the box. Now you may have to kind of wiggle around with this, play with it a little bit. This doesn't always want to line up. So we get that through, we can go ahead and put on our lock nut. And then we're just going to repeat the same process on the other side. So now we're going to go ahead and slip our shoulder bolts back into place. You will kind of have to fight the leaf spring. Typically it doesn't want to go in for me right away. So you may have to kind of wiggle it up and down, maybe move your axle out of the way, maybe put a little bit of force on the leaf spring with a jack just to kind of get it to line up perfectly, because it does kind of want to stick in the slipper spring box with those bolts in place. So get it kind of started. This one's about halfway through. That doesn't want to go the rest of the way, so we will have to persuade it a little bit. There is a grease zerk fitting on here, so we won't be able to just hammer directly onto the bolt head. So what we're going to do is use a socket. We'll put that right over it and use that to hit instead, so we don't damage that fitting. Kind of see what we need on the other side now. See if we need to kind of press up or pull down. Looks like we're lining up pretty good, so we'll just keep hitting that. And now we're down to the teeth. So this is what I was talking about before. You need to keep a wrench on there to hold that from moving, because those teeth bite into the hanger itself. And now that the teeth have fully closed up on our hanger, we can go ahead and put our nut on. When we're tightening this down, we want to make sure that it's actually getting flush up against the shoulder of our bolt, but we want to make sure that we're not pinching this too much, because if we start pinching the hanger, this leaf spring's not going to be able to kind of flow back and forth as you go over road bumps. Now that we have our shoulder bolts in place, tightened down, we're going to go ahead and torque all of our bolts on here down. Now there is two different settings. There'll be a higher setting for these larger gold bolts and a smaller one for your silver bolts. Now we're going to go ahead and put on our U-bolts. I've already gone ahead and pushed my axle up with my jack so that it's sitting back with the leaf spring. We're going to go ahead and put our brackets on for our shocks. Now these do go on a specific way. You're going to have these brackets that shoot out. We want those facing the inside of the trailer and then facing towards each other. So this one is going to go for our one on the right here. We'll drop that right onto the spring stack. And then we can slip our U-bolts up. Put my plate on as well, kind of help hold the bolts in place. All right, and with this new kit that I got, it's going to have a lock washer and then a nut. And we'll just kind of get those hands started. Want to make sure that you do these evenly. You don't want this plate or that bracket to kind of sit crooked. So I can kind of throw it all off. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of start and tighten these down, and like I said, just kind of switch back and forth. That way you're getting this down evenly. And then once it starts getting real tight, we can switch over to our torque wrench. If you look in the back of your instruction packet, it's going to have a list of each different brand so that you can find the correct torque settings. All right, now we can go ahead and do the same thing on every other axle. So for our next part, we're going to be putting on our brackets that hold up our shocks. Now this is going to go on that bracket that we stuck on our spring stack, and you're going to see that there's 4 holes in it. There's going to be 3 that are kind of spaced further away. The one that's kind of by itself is going to be at the very bottom, and then these brackets are going to be for mounting up to our bracket on our spring stack. Now there's going to be 2 different sizes of bolts left in your kit. There'll be some really long ones, and those long ones are going to take this smaller lock nut, and then these shorter bolts are going to have the bigger lock nut. So you can see the difference in the size. We want to make sure that we're using the larger ones with these small bolts. So we're going to go ahead. Like I said, there are 3 different spots that you can mount it. That's really more if you're putting on just the shocks and you're not doing the full Comfort Ride system. For us today, we're going to be using these 2 top holes. If you were doing the actual brackets for just the shocks, you may have to kind of change up exactly which one you're using. Now I'm going to go ahead and I will slip my bolt in the back of this and put it through our bracket. Same thing with our second bolt. And then I'm going to hand tighten that on, and they say to kind of leave it loose so that you can adjust a little bit so that when you're putting the shock on, it's a little bit easier. I find it's easier if you just torque these down now. That way you don't have that shock in the way while you're trying to torque these 2 bolts down, and then also it's a little bit easier if this isn't wobbling on you at the same time you're trying to fight and compress that shock. All right, now that we got this side down, we can go ahead and do the same thing for each of our brackets. Now that we have that on, we're going to go ahead and put our wheels back on. We'll lower down our trailer and have the full weight on our suspension, and then we can go ahead and install our shocks. Before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and also torque down our lug nuts. Typically, you'll see a sticker on the sidewall by your wheels with exactly what your torque setting is for those wheels. And you're just going to want to make sure you go in a star pattern. So when we go to set up our shocks, it is going to be a very specific pattern for both the top and the bottom bolt. Starting off with our bottom, we're going to have this facing towards the inside of our trailer, and what we're going to have is that one black bracket that we installed. We're going to have our bolt. We'll put a washer, a spacer, and then we're going to slip through our shock, and that spacer is going to kind of help push it away from the bracket and get it lined up perfectly with our spring box. Then we'll stick another washer on there, and then our shock, and then another washer and our nut. Now for the top, it is a lot more. We're going to have quite a bit on one side. So on the outside of our spring box, we're going to have our bolt, a washer, our shock, another washer, a spacer, and then we have these triangle spacers. Now they're going to have a fatter end and a skinnier end. We want the fatter end on the outside to face the same way as our shock is facing. So we have to make sure that as we tighten it up, we're making sure that that angle stays exactly the same as our shock. And then on the inside of our slipper spring box, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to have our fat end facing up so that these two kind of help offset each other so that the shock's going to sit in there correctly. And then we're going to go ahead and put on our nut. Now, I'm showing this to you outside because it is really tight in there and it's going to be really hard to kind of see anything. So hopefully this helps you out and makes it a lot easier when you go to install it yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and take all of our stuff that I already showed you and we'll slip that into the top hole that's still available on our slipper spring box. I'm going to slip on our triangle spacer, our lock nut, just get that kind of started on there. It doesn't have to be super tight yet. We still have to go ahead and get our bottom bolt in place as well. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and I will pull off the bolt here. All right, we'll slip this up into place, and you will have to kind of compress this just a bit to get it to really sit there correctly. We'll do bolt in just a little bit. I'm gonna put my washer on and my spacer. Another washer. And then we can set this up into place. All right, I've got that all the way through. We can go ahead and put on our other washer and our lock nut. And then we can start tightening it down. I like to get it pretty tight and then kind of force the spacers to go the correct way, and then we can finish tightening it the rest of the way. Because right now, as you start tightening this, these are just going to keep wobbling around. Next, we can go ahead and torque these down. All right, and we're just going to repeat the same process for each side. Well, I think it does it for today's installation of the Roadmaster Comfort Ride Trailer Leaf Spring Kit with the shock absorbers here on our 2022 JAYCO Eagle HT fifth wheel trailer. My name's Kevin. Thanks for watching.